am going to go ahead and enter you all's names on our sign-in sheet and put virtual. I have email addresses, but I don't believe I have phone numbers for you.
You just want to see if they can sign in on the chat and.
Oh,
get it
that'll
out
be
there?
perfect. See, that's why 2 heads are better than 1. So what I'm asking is name, email, phone number, and what neighborhood you're associated with, please. The notes. Those, yes, some over there. Thank you.
We've got those in the chat if you want to see them up there on the screen. I will email them to you.
And I apologize, guys. I might have to step in and out. So again, my apologies.
It's 5:32.
Janita, you want to get it kicked off and we'll catch people up as they come in online?
Absolutely. We have an agenda in
Yep.
front of you as well. So again, hello, everyone, and thank you for being here this evening. My name is Danita Hoskin, and I am the community builder here at Midtown Indy. I'm excited about being here. I am a resident of the Crown Hill Neighborhood Association, and I also serve as president of the Crown Hill Neighborhood Association, of which I have very deep roots in that area. Family's been there since 1952. But today I'm excited about being here because, see, I'm a firm believer that what happens in one community affects all other communities. And with Midtown Indy serving as the umbrella group, if you will, for 20 neighborhoods in the mid-north area, this is an awesome opportunity for us all to come together. I know tonight is just us, and we have a lot to cover in a very short period of time. I know you all, or several of you, have been involved in the previous conversations. And so I've been able to do some catch up, but I'm looking forward to learning more about it and how together we will be able to work to further the plans and opportunities that are available for us in the Keystone-Monon area. I have on my agenda about housekeeping, and for the people that are in the room who have not been to the Midtown Indy office, our restrooms are just right out the door to the left through the door, and it's door 2 and 3, and they're unisex, so you can go into either one of them. And just because we're all on our phones, I am notorious for not remembering to silence my phone. So I just went ahead and silenced my phone. We do know that some of you may need to zip in and out, and please feel free to do so. And I'll stop right there and say thank you and welcome. And I'll turn it back over to you, Michael.
Great. I recognize several of you who have been involved in the conversations. I think we had the last one, I want to say it was March or April of this year, where we haven't really made a lot of progress on the formal planning process, in part as we've continued to try to have conversations with Bel Air and others to try to create a joint consensus and desire to enter into this process collaboratively. And I think Danita and I have spent a lot of time with Ivan, and she spent some time with the folks at Bel Air to just catch up to the conversations that were going on previously with some business owners and some business leaders and residents, et cetera, in the prior conversations last year at Refinery. You remember last fall, we did apply for and receive 2 grants, one from MIBOR for $10,000 and one from the National Association of Realtors for $5,000. Those were part of a budget that we had, so sort of the working group had agreed that Midtown would commit staff time over the course of 3 years. We would raise these grant dollars, and then the community would collaborate to raise the money. As we estimated that this total planning process is probably going to cost somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000 by the time we get mapping, data analysis, and all that work done. But the good news is the first half of this process is all community-oriented work. It doesn't cost a ton of money. What we do have to do with the NAR grant is we have to spend that money by the end of this year. And we're hoping that we've reached a point of general consensus around the desire to do this plan, that we can start the work of building the infrastructure for the planning process. I detailed that, I think, last fall and in the spring, but I'll kind of go over it again just briefly so folks can understand when we talk about that planning work, what we mean. And much of it is really kind of the work I think, Jesse, you're doing in terms of trying to bring business owners together around a common banner. It's really outreach. It's really inviting people to the table. It's identifying a committee structure, the roles, the objectives of the planning process in the minds of the community, identifying roles, actually creating job descriptions for these volunteer positions, and then as a community selecting the people who are going to fill those positions. And all of that is critical to us submitting our plan to DMD as part of the certified city planning process. The process itself, I think I've detailed before, is going to take 18 to 24 months for this thing to start and end. But much of that work is what really needs to happen now in terms of letting people know a process is going to exist and giving them input and opportunities for buy-in to that process. And it's really registering as many people as we can find that live in, work in, or own property in the neighborhood who would be interested to know that this process is underway. I think we've seen in the last 6 or 8 months plenty of reasons to reinforce the need for this process in terms of land use and zoning cases continuing to be reactive things where people might be doing something that they haven't necessarily brought to the neighborhood, like large scale developments happening at 46th and the Monon. I think there were 2 of those just last fall. Reacting is not a good position to be in. Being proactive and identifying as a community what you want where really helps cut down on that reactiveness. I think we've also seen a lot of continued market volatility in residential prices, in occupancy types, in rentals versus home ownership, in out-of-town investors buying property, which may be displacing longtime residents, fixed income seniors, et cetera. And so I think the sooner we can get this process going, the sooner we can begin to address some of those impacts. Any questions about where we left off, or anybody new to the conversation that needs us to rewind a little bit about what the certified planning process is?
I'm pretty new to this, so.
Pretty new, okay. Well, I won't go into the 27 slide deck about it, but a certified city plan is really a tool and a resource for neighborhoods. Historically, the city would help, long-range planning had staff that would come and help you do plans. The city did away with that about 6 or 8 years ago. And so now for a neighborhood to have its own plan and for that plan to be recognized by the city council and the Metropolitan Development Commission and to serve as guidance into the city's zoning, land use, infrastructure investment plan, it has to follow a certain process. The city wants to make sure that plans are jointly created by neighborhoods across demographics, across incomes, across segments of the neighborhood, user types, businesses, churches, nonprofits, residents, et cetera. And so they have laid out this very meticulous planning process. Typically, it's hard for a neighborhood to do that on their own. They kind of need a third-party backbone organization to support, to hold people accountable, to dot the I's and cross the T's. And we have volunteered to do that with the Keystone-Monon community at large. And that's the process we're talking about.
Cool.
Brian, welcome to the conversation. If you wouldn't mind just signing in with your name, email, and phone number to the chat so Danita can add you to the list, that'd be great.
Will do. Good to see everybody.
Hey, Brian.
So just anecdotally, I'd like to kind of go around the room and hear from people what you're working on. I think I know where everybody is in the neighborhood in terms of what you call home, but generally interested in what's changing on the ground as you see it. What are you working on? What things do you think are a priority? And happy to start with our folks online. Jesse, you want to kick us off?
Heck yeah, let's do it. Well, it's been an interesting few years for us at Black Circle and Loom. So just with COVID and everything like that, we had to move everything outside. And of course, there wasn't much communication or any sort of community organization at that point. So we're sort of trying to play catch up here and I guess, prove that we are here for the neighborhood. One thing that I've done in the last year since we've been meeting is just recognize that there are opportunities for the businesses to show that they are giving back to the neighborhood, and we can use our collective resources and network to provide some manpower for some of these plans that you folks are coming up with. And certainly we want to be part of those too. So we have formed a nonprofit to get all the business owners together so that we can sort of get this information out from the meetings, and then mobilize folks as needed for whatever plans that we all collectively decide on. So that's been the main thing for us this year, is just trying to. I've been working and talking with Anderson a lot about just trying to communicate and meet neighbors, because I feel like we're having a very difficult time reaching a consensus on things.
Appreciate that. And I honestly think that any pre-work you can do to bring business owners into a common group in the corridor will serve this planning process extremely well.
We've got a pretty good foundation laid down. So one of my follow-up questions will just be where we can sign folks up or send them for your information that you mentioned previously.
And we're going to talk a little bit later about kind of how we would propose to spend some of these grant dollars to kind of build a planning infrastructure where people can register, people can understand the process in a digital format, where we can maintain virtual engagement opportunities, we can generate surveys, and just kind of build some back-end infrastructure to support this. We can talk a little bit more in detail about that and work collaboratively with the stakeholders to build that. But ideally, before the end of the year, we would build a landing page and some infrastructure where folks can identify that they want to be part of it, tell us what kind of stakeholder they are, where they are, and we can reinforce that with the Midtown magazine that's going to homeowners in the area, with the newsletter, and by word of mouth, and with business support, with flyers and QR codes and storefronts that folks can kind of follow along with us and learn.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
We went through the trouble of doing the 501c3, so we can do help with that if we need a sponsor or whatever. And then I do have a landing page and fundraising set up. So yeah, we're happy to contribute to that. Thank you.
Great. Brian, anything you want to tell us about what's going on in your world?
Well, first, just my gratitude to you, Michael, and your group for sort of keeping this momentum going. As you know, having worked with business owners across the city for a while, I think a lot of us are aligned, but it's very easy to lose steam because we have these other entities that sort of demand time, that sort of pay bills and stuff like that. So gratitude for championing this forward. And gratitude to Jesse for his, all the things he's done on the corridor and in the leadership with starting up this new group. I can't add a ton. I mean, we're just trying to do Refinery 46 as well as we can. Get great businesses, help them grow with the spillover benefit that great businesses that are located in the corridor are going to have a positive byproduct on the area. And clearly we want to be sort of singing the praises when that happens. So that's what we've been focused on more. Without dwelling deeply, I would just echo Jesse's position that it has been more challenging to build consensus with the community of recent, as opposed to the first 3 or 4 years that we were in operations. And so perhaps the leadership and sort of capacity of Midtown Indy to bring consensus can help us sort of mitigate some of the challenges there. But I'll just say I personally backed off a little bit after having some of our efforts thwarted that we thought were pretty reasonable, but not going to dwell on that. We want to move forward and sort of see the vision that we all agree on fulfilled. So excited to be here.
Thanks, Brian. We'll kind of round out the online folks and then move into the room. Brandon, anything you want to share and contribute?
No, I will say that, I mean, thanks you to Brian and Jesse, for those aiding on the community conversations that we had. I feel like it was yesterday, but it has been a long time, right? I think we all have been extremely busy. Our heads have been elsewhere, but we've known that this is out there. I've worked this year of trying to bring consensus and trying to kind of get in front of some splintering, trying to kind of like understand the lay of the land and working with the Bel Air team and whatnot. There's been some people who were very loud who dropped off, and I've been having those one-on-one conversations and working some city stuff to just make sure some of the development that has received zoning and whatnot, that is actually fulfilling what they said they were going to do. But I'm looking forward to kind of getting our heads back to this. I think we need to have those messy conversations to be able to get a consensus. No, it's not always black and white. It's that gray where I think we'll be able to move forward. But we need to find that, sooner than later, and go from there. So thank you all.
In the room, Anderson, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, as I say, I'm fairly new to this. I've lived in the Bel Air neighborhood since October of last year and was made aware of the Bel Air Neighborhood Association like 5 months ago. And some reason Ivan's latched onto me. Thinks I'm a good kid, I guess. So I'm here basically in place of him to decide how we can best help the neighborhood, from the actual neighbors side. And for me, it's best connecting with the businesses better. I know some of the businesses felt like they were alienated and left out of the conversations, and that's important for me, is that we involve everyone on 46th Street, 52nd Street, whatever they are, and in between. So,
great.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Anderson.
I'm terrible with it.
Anderson.
Thank you.
I know we have we've been working on a few plans. I have something specifically going on at School 91 for an actual food production garden there that will branch out into the neighborhood as well. And Ivan is working on getting us a community garden more on the 52nd Street side to service the renters that are down towards Keystone on 52nd.
Great. Nick?
Yeah, I have a few things. I'm about to get really urban plannery, so just be aware. I had kind of an informal conversation with someone from DPW about kind of getting a process going for addressing some safety concerns on 46th Street.
Which ones?
Yeah, right. Specifically crossings and bike infrastructure. So obviously there are no signalized crossings between Evanston and College. And there is a lot of crossing activity at the Monon and Arsenal Park. Specifically, Arsenal Park and Marcy Village is a prime place to have a safe crossing. And then also Norvaldo, all the people crossing to go to Loon and Gold Leaf, and also Refinery too. Especially on the weekends when you guys have your market going on. There's a lot of pedestrians from the neighborhood crossing 46th Street. And that's like one of the most dangerous parts, because that's the transition area. That's the transition from you're on Highway 46th Street or Highway Keystone, and now you need to slow down and get into neighborhood Keystone. And so that's a transition that I think we need to think about. I've noticed a lot of new housing construction in the neighborhood. That's new, I feel like, since the last time we met. I think the first one that I noticed was that big house that's built on 52nd, but there have been a few houses built between 46 and 52nd in the past year. New businesses coming online. The retail that's west of the barber shop looks like it's getting occupied again. I don't know what's going on there. There was something called like Bad Boys Club or something. I don't remember.
It says, sorry to interrupt, Nick. It says Hustlers Club, and I think it's supposed to be some kind of entrepreneur thing. It's just a kind of a this, I guess, a name that could be deciphered certain ways.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. I know, no salon. There was supposed to be a garden shop that was gonna go into that little white building that's around the curve on 46 where it meets the Monon, but I haven't seen any movement there. The nickel plate trail is funded. That's a new thing that's happened since we last met. From what I've heard, DPW doesn't know what the final alignment is really going to be through the neighborhood because there are concerns about crossing with Keystone. And it's going to go down either one of the neighborhood roadways or the nickel plate down to 42nd. And then by the fairground.
The last meeting I went to was last month. It was coming down Keystone on the east side of the street and then crossing at 46th Street. And then there would be flashing lights to cross 46th Street to go on that trail past the refinery.
Interesting. Okay.
Have some pictures of it later.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to see
Yeah.
those. That's big, so that'll be really cool to see. And I think they've said that there are plans to put a bridge over Keystone at some point.
That was the people that were there said it's not officially funded. They have the money to design it. They don't have the money to build it,
Yeah,
but there's enough push and people, cyclists dying in Indianapolis to basically make it happen.
yeah. Considering I used to work for the body that would fund projects like that, it's probably like 10 years, 7 to 10 years. 7 is very optimistic, but probably it's gonna be a while.
Their estimate was 3 to 5, so yeah, 10 sounds right.
Yeah.
It took, the funding for the Monon Bridge over 38th Street was funded in 2012, but
Yeah.
not for money until 2021. So it does, even if you get the federal funding now, it may be money for 10 years. from now.
Right, I mean, even the Monon widening was supposed to happen like 3 years ago, I think, and it's just, so that's just how things are. One last thing, Indigo has put out its new route, its new service plan for the next, do you know the timeline on the new service plan for Indigo?
There are realignments for individual red line station upgrades, and then there are closure schedules for 38th Street that are all different.
No, I
periods of
mean
time.
like the whole new route that they just put out, like the new route map.
Yeah, there were 7 or 8 lines that were adjusted.
Yeah, I was saying the 19, which goes right through our neighborhood. Instead of splitting 52nd and 46th, they're just going to go down 46. So instead of having 60-minute service on both roads, it's going to be 30-minute service on 46th Street. So it will be more frequent, but that is kind of a loss for the apartments that are up there. So something to consider, but those are all my updates that I have.
That's great, because everything that each of you has mentioned is a significant component to be formed in the plan in terms of taking what you know and identifying aspirations for infrastructure, for pedestrian crossings, for food access and community garden space, and to get updates from all of those agencies specific and relative to your community. Any questions about the grant funding? I think I mentioned at the top of the hour, we had received those grants. The funding is still sitting there. It was designed specifically to pay for components, marketing, outreach, and engagement, and consultant services related to the planning process. 5,000 of that money has to be spent by the end of the year. The National Association of Realtor Money needs that money to be spent by the end of the year and reported out by December. And so what we've proposed to do is to put together a budget on marketing and engagement and putting some back end together to help give people a forum to register, and putting QR codes and printing copies that go up in businesses and libraries, and use those dollars to recruit the community and make them aware of the planning process, because without them at the table, it really can't start. And I think what we really have to focus on, and I'll share my screen here just to kind of remind folks what the core components that the city is looking for is. It's really this process charter. Can everybody see that on the online there? A statement of purpose can be fairly broad and all-encompassing, but identifying the responsibilities of the steering committee, the composition and governance, I suspect if there's any degree of ongoing distrust or reconciliation that needs to happen, this is the process where I think we can make everybody feel comfortable in terms of how the process will go, who will have what control and what voting and how many people, who's going to be in the driver's seat. And then you essentially from here just go through and actually create a steering committee. You can decide as a community how many of those are business owners, organization leaders, how many of those are residents. I think we previously talked about the larger Keystone-Monon community kind of being broken up into 4 segments, sort of south of 46th and north of 46th, kind of a northeast, southeast, north, southwest, southeast quadrants for deeper diving planning. But this steering committee composition should ideally have stakeholders from each of those 4 quadrants and each of the business and organizational types. So you have a fairgrounds or a Patachou Foundation or a church, salon operators, cafe operators, but essentially building a core team that can functionally work together and that has standing and identity in the neighborhood that people will recognize, that people will trust. And I think, Jesse, the work you're doing on the business side can really feed into this very well. And I think in terms of relationships between Bel Air and Keystone-Monon and Brandon and others, I feel like we can start this process relatively quickly. And much of this early rest of this year conversation is back into these top items in terms of what's the meeting structure, what's the committee structure, who's got what role, and identifying who is at the table and who's not at the table, if that makes sense. Any questions about that? We are happy to sort of begin to document these things and propose ideas and propose structures that folks can react to, just to keep the conversation moving. We're not going to tell you you have to do it a certain way. We will tell you whether, in our opinion and based on our experience, whether the way you're doing it is likely going to satisfy what the city's requirements are. Because at the end of this document that I'm sharing, and I can email this out to everyone, we essentially have to submit a proposal to the city for this process charter about our organizational type, what our outreach is, who we contacted, how we contacted them. It's a very detailed document. We are happy to be the drivers of compiling that document with your support.
Just sort of a tactical question. Is there some volume of like participation, let's say, of people sort of cumulatively in an area that the city wants to see? Or is it merely how effective our paperwork is and how diligently we jump through their red tape that they want to see?
I will show you exactly. I'm going to probably have to end the share and restart it. The specifics of what they're looking for are contained in this checklist. And it's really all about the process of your to-be planning process. It's all about the documentation of your plan, documentation of how you're going to communicate and that you did communicate and with whom you communicated, that the plan content with boundaries and maps are all there. So we build our process along the way and we submit our plan to engage, our committee structure, and our planning process outline to the city under this process. They then authorize us to start the process. But what they will want to see is, did you knock on doors? Did you mail to people? And what percentage of total residents engaged? What diversity geographically, income, age, race of folks were engaged in some material way in your process? And so all of those things will matter, not just that we did it, but that we planned to do it and that we documented doing it and then we actually did it. The good news is that's kind of our role in this, is to help document it, help build the system. And then it makes it easier for volunteers and community members to engage because there's a defined process. There's tasks associated with how many phone calls or how many flyers or which doors get knocked on. there's an inventory list of business owners that have committed to be part of the process, of churches, of residents, of schools, et cetera. And then we will identify in this, you don't necessarily want the resident and business owner planning meetings to be together. You want to have a resident conversation, you want to have a business conversation. You want to have a church conversation, you want to have an institution conversation. At some point, all of those things roll together, but business owners are going to feel most comfortable talking with other business owners about business needs. Then we have to reconcile with residents what they want. But Brian, what they want to see is all of the content that's in this checklist, that we've done it, that we've thought about it ahead of time, and that in that previous shared document here, hang on a second, that we built all of these pieces, and that we invited people to be part of building the pieces. I can't find that in my tray at the moment. Relative to the committee structure, and the statement of purpose, the responsibilities, the job descriptions, and that we documented who all of our committee people are, and that we have their signature to participate in the process.
Great.
It sounds very burdensome. I promise if we write it down, if we do the right outreach, the process will flow actually quite smoothly.
You shared this at some point in previous meetings. You said 18 to 24 months is usually sort of the beginning to having a plan in place would be a fair, if we execute well.
Right, and it takes about 3 months, let's call it, it's going to take 12 to 16 weeks to get this document together and submitted to the city to formally begin the planning part. But what comes before the planning is your committee structure, your assigned roles, and the engagement of people that a plan process will happen in the future.
So
And that's
assuming
really, the groundwork is between now and January of knocking on doors, telling people what the planning process is, setting expectations, getting buy-in, and getting people into these jobs.
assuming we follow the process, this is helpful for what sort of volume of people, assuming they participate on each of these sort of subcommittees, do you think we should try to have in mind?
I would try to keep a steering committee under 11 people, 11 to 12 people. You usually try to have an odd number. I think at 11 or 12, you have good room there to represent each of the different resident, business, organizational, institutional, with some different variety of interest groups that are being represented by a stakeholder. Your committees are going to be focused predominantly on engagement, communication, and then individual segments of the plan. You've got infrastructure, you've got green space, you've got transportation, you've got food security, you've got land use and zoning, you've got housing planning. If this neighborhood decides, we want to put infill housing guidelines in place, or we want to review the city's infill housing guidelines and see if we think that they serve the interests of our neighborhood. I mean, the process can extend itself by going down, not a rabbit hole, but taking a path that says we really want to restrict or recommend or entice people to build differently in our neighborhood. So we want to do housing plans.
I was thinking trampoline parks everywhere. Everyone's cool with that.
Like trampoline parks.
Is there a number of committees that you're required to have?
There's not a number of committees. What's required is that the committees you have diverse representation,
Okay.
and that the committee chair positions are advertised, known, and that people support the folks running those committees.
Okay.
We don't have to have an election for these things, but you do have a public meeting that says, these are the folks who have been nominated to serve in each of these steering committee, each of the committee positions, each of the plan positions, and we're going to hold a public meeting to ratify those as a working group and ask the community to support the ratification of our plans, of our organization. And then you start to move into the sort of private conversation working group things. Once you've told people what you're doing, you've given them access to the table, you've communicated with them, then you can actually begin to do the work and start reporting back results and draft plans, et cetera. it sounds very daunting, I know, but it's, having been through about 6 of these, it feels like old hat at this point.
So how do we form it? Like that initial steering committee? Like who are the people who go to the neighborhood and be like, here are the people that we have selected? Like,
What I would like each of you to do is to consider whether you would be willing to serve to support the formation of that steering committee as an informal working group together. And that each of you, plus maybe we get somebody from School 55, maybe we get a church leader, somebody from the state fair, another nonprofit person, and round out an informal working group that reasonably can speak with some degree of user diversity, of perspective, of age, of income, to propose this plan and to identify what the right structure is and to nominate individuals to fill these positions permanently. It may be that this informal working group ends up being, it makes sense for this group to be half of the steering committee. That's more than likely an outcome of folks who have already been at the table, who have a desire to do this, who are interested in doing it, and who already fill many of those perspectives. But what you can't do is call this working group the steering committee without asking people for buy-in to it. So
working group approves the like initial 12 weeks for you guys to help do the outreach. The outreach then gets the city to say, go ahead. At that point, we do the more formal effort of steering committee. They do all the outreach work to get some degree of consensus. From that, we come back to you guys or work alongside you guys to create plan gets stamped.
well, actually the working group formulates the recommendations and the plan that we submit to the city about how we're going to do it. You say, this is what our steering committee is going to look like. This is who we involved. This is the job descriptions. This is how we arrived at the steering committee. This is how we selected the members of the steering committee. This is how we communicated about it. They will bless it at that point, and then you're ready to actually start planning and communicating about, we're meeting tonight to talk about parks. We're meeting tonight to talk about green space, land use, zoning, business interests. And some of those conversations will be small constituency group conversations when this happens, because you can't get 75 people together in any one space at any one time. And not all of those conversations are conducive to a Zoom platform, right? We'll probably, every public meeting we have will have to be some form of a hybrid conversation where we have an in-person and a virtual option just to increase access. But yes, this working group over the next 8 weeks will do most of the heavy lifting in terms of identifying the positions, the governance structure. And I think if Bel Air and Keystone-Monon and business owners from those areas can all agree on those basic planning fundamentals, I don't think you're going to face a lot of resistance from your neighbors and your nonprofits and your other folks to that process. At least that's generally been my experience. Anything we haven't talked about that you have questions about related to the process? Essentially, the next step would be for us to sort of announce that there is an informal working group beginning to meet, to set up a meeting schedule, to identify to folks what the agenda is going to be, and we can kind of send you all a preliminary mock-up of, this would be an ideal timeline, a frequency schedule of when we need to hit the metrics for the mission or charter vision, the committee structure, and identify the roles and begin to let you help us identify who are the right people for those roles. Does that sound reasonable?
Motion to approve.
Brandon commented to sign him up.
Second.
Are there other folks that you've interacted with that would be a natural fit to this informal working group process? Because at this point, there's what, 4 or 5 of you. You probably want more resources in this informal process than just the 5 of you. So are there other folks, specific nonprofits, churches? The fairgrounds has indicated they're interested in participating in this process, but Ray Allison's probably not coming to all of these meetings. there's probably an input venue for the fairgrounds where they begin to have those conversations.
Patch. You suggested them earlier.
Patchu Foundation.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of nonprofits that are in the neighborhood. And that's really the only one that kind of comes to mind, unless there's a smaller one that. Maybe Gold Leaf owners.
Gold Leaf, School 91, and I got the chat there.
Did we determine if Hope Plumbing is in our area officially?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
they've got a big presence and resources and
I
people.
mean, I think we really need to look for some more residents too, and I don't know, how many people are kind of engaged at Bel Air?
Depends on the month.
I mean, obviously, we should choose from more than Bel Air, but like, I think your quadrant idea
I like that.
is a really good one.
There's usually at least 6, just kind of rotates what 6.
Okay. Isn't there like a Friends of Arsenal Park or something? Is that the group? I mean, there's the people who run the, there's the people who run the garden.
The African American firefighters museum folks.
Yeah. Who operates the garden? Is that Keystone-Monon now? They just kind of operate the garden, right?
I don't think it's sort of official. Brandon could speak more specifically, but that I think it's you're right. It's like the Friends of something,
Okay.
not a gardener. So did not keep tabs on that one.
Well, I mean, that could be a group. I know there's a very interested, Howie is a very interested resident of RC Village. I've talked to him multiple times and he's very interested in urban planning and making the community better.
I was wrong about the quadrants. We actually created 3 areas. It was south of 42nd to 49th, and then 49th to 54th. Does that still make sense in your minds to band it that way?
Bel Air won't like it, but yeah, we had kind of decided we would work on south of 46th.
Yeah, I mean,
It was too big to say 2 areas, like north of 46th and south of 46th. And the fairgrounds area felt like a fairly far removed from 46th, between 38th and 42nd. But all of this can be realigned. This was just a proposal last year, and I don't know that we reached consensus on it. So it's valid to revisit it if it really should be functions of 46th. But 46th feels more like the main street of the larger area, even though there are other commercial corridors. And I would hate to divide that where you're looking at the 2 sides separately. And here the goal was to kind of try to keep the main corridors together rather than on one side of the street or the other.
Sounds kind of 49th is not a natural, like it's a street, but it's not a natural divide for the area. I think you're all right if focus, if zone 2, if it went to 46th Street with the understanding that it was on the north and south side of the street.
It is in the map.
And then focus 1 would be on the understanding that it has 54th, has 52nd Street and has both sides of the street as well. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it currently does have that, but we can make that more clear. 46th is kind of in the middle of zone 2 and 52nd is in the middle of zone 1.
I'm saying, but for you go from the fairgrounds to 46th Street. Like your divide line is not 49th Street.
the divide line should be 46th Street. I think
So-
you're trying to not do, but I think it should be.
I don't know,
It's more of
scratch
a
it.
natural.
But do you feel like that within 2 blocks of 46th Street, most people think 46th Street is their center, rather than it just being 2 sides of a commercial corridor?
Yeah. I guess I was trying to look at the natural breakdown of the neighborhood is although it won't even itself out. 46th Street to 52nd Street is a,
Yeah, 46th Street to 52nd Street is definitely 46th Street is the way, and then south of that is Fairgrounds, is the way
yeah,
the neighborhood feels.
right.
My
And
only
then-
confusion is the 52nd to 54th.
Which I think,
That's-
although small, it's still like, it has its own world that it deals with.
Yeah, I mean, these are like the technicalities, but it's like, when I think about the plan we've been discussing, I feel like, I mean, we could be talking about like Mama Corollas and a whole boatload of things that I view as fundamentally like a different world than the challenges that we have and the opportunities.
Is Butler, or is
Well, what if we took area 3 and brought it up to encompass the deaf school, and then made area 2 go from the deaf school to 52nd, and then separated 52nd to 54th in another conversation?
Is there like a number of people you're trying to keep with each of these?
Well, it was kind of a geography, an area of density, and a stakeholder
is this the develop
perspective.
that 54th Street, like where the Planet Fitness and everything is, to like encompass that? Is that more or less when I think north of 52nd Street, I think of that like retail area?
It could. I think a lot of folks, since we were talking at 46th Street, felt like 54th Street was really far away, but people at 54th Street on the south side of the street are in this neighborhood and not in Canterbury or Meridian
Right.
Kessler. So this was just an early attempt to say, let's break it down into pieces. Let's not divide it at a main commercial arterial. Let's try to split it in neighborhoods, but you know better than I do whether residents see themselves as segmented in one area of the neighborhood or not. We certainly don't want to put them in a category that they wouldn't identify with.
Yeah, I really think splitting it into like your fourth site here. You know, having a 52nd to 54th, which is smaller but has its own identity, like the 52nd to 46, 46 to 42nd, and 42nd to 38. And that's 4 different groups. But that's just my opinion. So I'd like to hear what everyone else thinks. That's just how I imagine people identify as. Like
I live on 49th and 54th feels like miles away.
Same here.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point, 54th Street is a very different corridor, particularly as it approaches Keystone with a lot higher business density and different types of commercial uses. It's not 46th Street. It's not 42nd Street. So I think each of those corridors need their own conversation. And I think, you know, Jesse, in your business conversation, is it predominantly the 46th Street corridor, or is it some of these other corridors as well?
I think I tend to agree with Nick about the borders there, but my concern is having done neighborhood cleanups for the last 6 years, there is a completely different side of the street on the south side of 46 than the north side of 46. So that's where he's getting his sort of boundaries that he's thinking. But my concern is if we split it at 46, then south of 46 is going to get neglected.
Well, and that was kind of my point in varying it, pushing it down to 40, from 49th down to 42nd, so that you pull the north and south sides of 46th Street for several blocks into that corridor. We're going to isolate somebody somewhere in this process.
Yeah.
And if we split a corridor like 52nd or 46, we can't actually just do one side of the street. That whole, when we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about connectivity, transit, all of that stuff, you kind of need to look at both sides of the street.
Understand.
We may end up deciding that each of these commercial corridors need a commercial conversation,
Right.
and then there needs to be a larger segmented neighborhood conversation and ask people to identify what they consider their primary main street for their neighborhood, whether it's 46th or 52nd or 54th. You're only going to end up with maybe 10% of the plan that really identifies with that 52nd to 54th Street segment as because it is two different worlds. Those folks are mostly shopping on 54th, not coming down to 46th.
Yeah. I think for me, and this is just sort of a selfish vision, is that, we want to develop 46th Street as sort of a, have its own identity and, and be sort of the epicenter of the neighborhood. So that's why I would like your boundaries. But I do agree with Nick and Anderson that it's a very different, completely different thing north of 46 than it is south of 46. So I don't
But
know.
what if we
I
do?
agree with your logic.
Yeah.
I think the neighborhood would feel different, but I agree in like what you're going for. That's what I was saying.
Well, then why don't we do it this way? Why don't we leave the boundaries where they are and invite everyone to be part? This is the topic tonight. It's this zone, which spans from here to here, right? We don't just invite people in that zone. We invite people in all the zones. This is the conversation around this area. So we get the benefits of dividing it that way without offending anyone, just so people know where we're focused for those conversations. Do you still want to keep it as 3, or do we want to kind of move to Nick's model of 4, of 38 to 42nd, 42nd to, well, we can't do that.
I was
I like the 3.
Can I,
Okay.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I was just imagining that for like getting like an equal number of people from the neighborhood to form the steering committee. Just to kind of, so that we can kind of have a fair number for each cluster, and like those clusters have their own identities, and so they would be represented kind of equally on the board as we like start the process. And then I totally agree with the idea of like including the corridors into the actual planning process because it will require infrastructure and stuff on both sides.
Okay. Yeah. That's great. Well, and we can also share this map with residents who may not even identify with a particular neighborhood name. And this gives them, I'm in zone 1, or I'm in zone 2, or I'm in zone 3 as a stakeholder when I engage in the process. It'll help us track where the concentration of input is actually coming from. I think just because of the natural community that is growing on 46th Street, we're going to see a heavier top side of 46th Street focused engagement. We're going to have to work extra hard between 38th and 42nd and between 52nd and 54th to get people to feel really invested in this process. And we will invite Meridian Kessler and or Canterbury to the table for these conversations because they have constituents that feel identified with those areas as well.
Do you know if there are any informal groups north of 52nd, similar to like Bel Air, like any grassroots kind of groups between 52nd and 54th?
I'm not. We did recently, I think, with Bel Air and a couple other neighborhoods. We're up. We thought there were 17 neighborhoods in Midtown. There's actually 20. Over the years, smaller groups have formed within neighborhood associations. I'm not aware of anything different. I do remember during the Meyer conversation, there was a group just north of Meyer, but I don't know that that would technically be in this boundary. So. Okay. I can find the name of that group. It was named after the street that runs north, just off of the north end of that parking lot. Yeah.
I mean, we could also put up interest forms at businesses if people want to be engaged, or they want to have like some part in the committee.
Okay. Well, I also thought I've mentioned to the broader Haverford leadership, because their main campus is both of their main fields are in these areas, and they just received a reprieve from IPS at 55. The IPS was going to take out 1 or 2 of the 3 diamonds and turn it into a parking lot for the renovation that's coming to the school, and that created a panic in the hearts of many youth baseball player and softball players in the greater broader Haverford Midtown area. But IPS has agreed to preserve all of the fields and to change their renovation plan not to eradicate any of those diamonds. And so I know that Haverford is interested in trying to find a way to make their home in this area permanent because they're currently at the behest of IPS and or the fairgrounds in terms of their utilization of those facilities.
So what happens after we kind of like, so do we start looking for funding after we have this committee structure set up, or do we do both?
Well, I think quietly conversations around who might support this planning process. We will refine the budget because we wrote this budget in 2020 or 2021 when this conversation started and those grants came last year. So I think we need to revisit that, and we need to start looking for community resources to do some of the components, because some of this cost can be decreased if we're not hiring a data consultant to pull all of the demographic data and housing and income data and housing occupancy and infrastructure stuff. The less we have to pay for some of that GIS mapping to actually render the proposed improvements to corridors and housing areas, the less we have to pay a vendor for that work, the less it will actually cost.
I can do that stuff.
Volunteering there?
Yeah. I probably already have it, honestly. I probably have it somewhere already. Jesse, you have graphic design chops, right?
I have a third-party graphic designer on my payroll. I can do something.
Flyers are a good first step.
There's a few names that do that.
Cool. Well, and as we start to communicate about this, what are we calling it? Are we saying Keystone-Monon and Bel Air? And are there other names that you're aware of? What we don't want to do is offend anyone. So do we just refer to the area? Do we list all of its aliases? Do we say Sobro, Keystone-Monon, Bel Air? Do we pull all of the legal descriptions and kind of make it fun? And if you live in any of these things that you call your neighborhood, this means you. We can put visuals on the communications that this is the area we're talking about.
I think that's a fun concept, because I think that's part of the design challenge that we'll tackle, is that we have this sort of schizophrenic identity or non-identity as a consequence. So I can't tell you necessarily the how-to, but I think that that method of all the things that are said, again, effectively executed, I think that could be really helpful to sort of the overall theme of what we're trying to accomplish.
But it might also be a fun social media engagement to sort of build some hype around what is this called?
That's what I was gonna say. Could we just, like, the very first thing we do is have an online poll that's what do you call
What is
this? And
What is
we just like post that everywhere in the neighborhood. There's QR codes, and it's just a rectangle that says 54th, Monon, Keystone, Fall Creek. What do you call this QR code? And then you just type it in and we get like word clouded or something.
Well, it starts to get more confusing now that the Broderville Bakehouse has opened up on 54th Street. in Kessler.
Yeah.
I think that's
I had
a
the,
question
I
to
had,
start knocking on doors with too, to be honest. I like
yeah,
that.
that's good. I had the idea of shortening Keystone-Monon to chemo, and then I realized that would be not sort of popular.
One might not spell that or think of that the way you,
Chemo Fairgrounds.
where you intended. Well, I wonder if, like, does the Sobro Spirits place, does their ownership or other folks who've been around forever have a different understanding of neighborhood names and identities?
I will absolutely ask Lou that question. That sounds hilarious to ask.
Well, I think this can be really fun and a rewarding process to really engage people and understand the history. And I think it would be helpful to invite people to help us narrate the history of the community. We've got some very early stuff that we put into the MIBOR grant about how the post-war workforce efforts helped build Arsenal Park and helped bring sewers to the Keystone-Monon area. Because you guys were on septic for an extraordinarily long time, which actually stunted the development of the area for many years, that and the active railway, which lots of things were dumped in the area in the early days operations of the railroad. And so that's why part of the neighborhood is really old and part of the neighborhood is half as old. It would also be cool if we could find some we're running out of weather to do outside stuff, but to find some community action that neighbors could begin to take together before, between now and say the spring, when the material planning process starts. It would be good to do something physical. Maybe it's coming to a market day or having a table or some activity, or maybe it's a community garden project or a mural project. Just something that gives people a sign that this process is going to invest actually in their neighborhood.
We've got a wall that can be a mural, as Nick knows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Happy
You know-
to volunteer the wall for that project,
I have
pending,
another-
pending Nick's approval.
I have another idea that could be a good gateway project if we're allowed to do it. The big old railway light that's right next to the nickel plate, right on 46th Street. That could be, I'm not a sculptor, I don't know what to do with that, but I mean, that is right at the front of the neighborhood. And it has character, and it talks about the history of the neighborhood, the old shitty railroad crossing light. And it's, it's kind of grimy, like all the stuff we have with like blue and all the black and like the industrial that we have on 46. So I mean, like, if we could find a scope, what?
We're all a little grimy, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. But yeah, if we could engage like a good artist, I think, because do you get higher points for grants if it's a gateway project?
It depends on the funder, but generally, yes. And
Okay.
there is I don't know if you applied the last time, Brian, for the mural project to the Elevate neighborhood grants. I can't remember if that's one you applied for, but didn't get selected.
Yes.
There's a similar process, different pot of money from INRC. That grant's due on the 14th of November, Janita.
Yes.
And so you could dust off the mural idea. I would be hesitant to do that with the Sobro identity, but doing something with that wall in the process, or this other gateway idea. That process, you have to be a neighborhood organization, so you could run it through the nonprofit business group, or we could sponsor it for you. But essentially, there's another up to $10,000 grant round that closes on the 14th of November.
Yeah, if we can work, again, if we can leverage grant sources to do something that's sort of moves the ball down the field for what we're talking about tonight, that's obviously a win. Maybe a giant QR code that can then scan into this. That was a joke.
Could we use those grant funds for the project?
Most of the MIBOR and NAR money is for the plan itself.
Okay.
If you've got ideas to spend it on a specific thing that supports the planning process, brings attention, I'm not opposed to pitching that.
It's like a couple grand or something to throw into it.
But we have to spend that $5 by the end of the year, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't remember the quote that I gave you, Brian, for how much it would cost to like get the painter out there and everything.
Sharpen the pencil, Nick.
I'll check through my emails.
I remember that being a $7,000 to $10,000 project. Because I think I gave you a letter of support for that, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
When does that period end?
In about 12 days.
Okay, well, that's not gonna happen. I'm not gonna have that done in 12 days, but when's the next one? Is it, when do they have dependable cycles?
Well, this was all CARES money, and so the pots of that are being spent in rapid succession. And the first round Elevate came from one pot of CARES money. This one came from a different pot. So I'm presuming this will be the last round of this, unless the city puts the money back in finds another pot of forgotten federal money that they want to give out to neighborhoods.
Michael, side note before we move on, would you mind sending me the information on that grant you just mentioned so I can look at it? I think you mentioned Elevate or something like that.
The neighborhood grant.
Yeah, any grant information that I could be applying for and like putting towards the pot and getting in our coffer would be wonderful.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
I will also email out to the group that charter analysis and that project checklist, just so you guys can begin to think about it. Again, we'll help write everything. and prompt you and push and also help you do outreach. Danita's happy to knock on doors. I'm happy to make
Absolutely.
calls to institutional folks. But before we go too deep into that, we have to outline our process so people understand that there is some structure, buy into it, and then we can identify what the planning process itself is going to look like in terms of meeting schedules. I love the idea of spending the next 3 months just making people aware that a group is working on this, of teasing out people's call outs to their neighborhood identity and or name. I think it could be a fun kind of thing, particularly if the businesses help have a sign war in terms of their name, business identity, or vote for something. I think that could be fun.
Could you take over like managing that data, or should we do that? Like if there was a QR code where people like put in stuff, like would you want that to be going to you guys, or should one of us?
Or you could share it on social and we could pick it up from there. Either way.
Nick, is that you talking about for voting for the neighborhood name?
Yeah, just like having people submit what they call it.
Want to be careful not to say it's a vote, that it's a majority thing.
Yeah,
because It might
exactly.
end up being called Sobro. if that
Yeah,
happens,
we
but-
don't call it a vote. I think we just say like, what do you call this neighborhood?
Right, yeah, that works.
And we don't really put any commitments on like, we're gonna pick the thing that.
I think you'll get some colorful things.
Yeah, we definitely will. I mean, look, I made.
Vote McVote face.
I made a crowdsourced bike map that someone like outlined a penis on with a bunch of stuff that I had to go in there really early in the morning and delete that before the next day. So luckily this one won't be public. We can just go farm out the stuff that doesn't work. But I don't know what platform to put that out on, unless maybe it's like a coordination among all of us.
Yeah, you send it out between, if there's a Bel Air social media,
Right.
someone on social media, if there's whoever, we can make
Yeah.
flyers, put them in the businesses. Oh,
I can't get it in the magazine until the January issue because the November, December issue is already to print, but we can put it in our newsletter. We can share it invite people on social. Other folks can do the same.
You know what? North Indy magazine would probably put it in.
Yeah.
We could do it at least a month ahead of time.
Actually, Michael just reached out to me and he wants us to do a little piece, so maybe it could just be that. I can.
Well, and when we did our strategic plan, I think Keystone-Monon had one of the highest rates of response to that process, which was encouraging. I mean, I think higher than Meridian Kessler or Broad Ripple or anybody else in terms of the number of folks that responded to that planning process. And I think we have the responses for some general quality of life questions broken down by neighborhood. I'm happy to share that with you all if you're interested in seeing that as well. We just did that. Was that August? July and August. I want to say 400 or 500 people from Keystone-Monon identified area actually responded, which was relatively high for a neighborhood. Well, cool. Well, we're pushing up close to 7. Anything else? Questions from you? Jesse will send you that grant info on the rest of these documents, and Danita will share the notes from tonight with everybody. And
When should we reconvene, and what do you need from us in the interim?
I think we'll come back to you in 2 weeks with let's sit down and talk about the preliminary charter vision, the preliminary governance structure, begin to talk amongst yourselves about what you think is an equitable way. How many people you think? Again, I think 11 or 12 is probably the right number. You may have different thoughts about the number of committee members. Begin to suggest people to fill those spots that we can reach out to. And if we can do that in the next 2 weeks, I think we'll be in a good spot.
Is this a good time for everyone?
I'm happy to come back and we can meet at the refiner, or we can meet somewhere in the neighborhood. It doesn't have to be at our office.
It works for me.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm flexible.
Okay.
I mean, I know that a lot of folks that we want to get to show up are working 8 to 5. So I think we have to accommodate as best as possible.
Thank you.
So we want to shoot for what would that be, the 16th? Does that work for you guys?
Fine.
Actually, you know what, Wednesday is still. Unless it's a little bit later.
I could do Tuesday, the 15th, or Thursday, the 17th at the same time.
I think either one would work for me.
So we have our neighborhood meeting on the 17th, so
Does the, what's that?
And mine's the 15th.
Well, looks like,
Tuesday.
I mean, you guys can meet without me and just let me know what's happening.
Okay. Well, even if you can only make part of it, you can do it.
Yeah,
Dial in on Zoom.
for sure.
So we'll stick with the 16th at the same time, 5:30, and we'll try to have Danita email in the interim to try to see what kind of progress you, in terms of your recommendations. I don't know how frequently you all want to meet in the meantime on an informal basis, or if somebody wants to kick it off with an idea, or you want us to kick it off with an idea and you guys can react to it and shape it on that governance structure and size and kind of fill in the blanks. What's easiest for you?
Have you seen an ideal breakdown between business and residents?
An ideal breakdown. It's hard to quantify that numerically. I think it's business type. I think more small business representation, one or two stakeholders from larger institutional representation, and then about 60% resident or nonprofit business stakeholders. I think people who depend on a paycheck from their stakeholder are very different than people who live in the neighborhood in some cases. But in your community, you probably have quite a bit of overlap of folks that live in the neighborhood and work in the neighborhood. I think if you got 40% residents, 30% businesses, and 30% other, you'd be in a good, generally good framework.
That's only 90%, but I'll take. the
So
concept.
he said 40, 30, 30.
Mhm.
I'm just joking. Oh, okay. You're the smart ass.
It's all good.
So did we land on the 16th?
And the seat's open for people to wander in, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
What's that, Brian?
We landed on the 16th?
Yes.
Yeah.
5:30 on the 16th.
And there was a list, and if you have some people in mind, organizations in mind, if you would go ahead and just shoot that contact information to me, that'd be most grateful.
Brian, do you still have, when we submitted the grant, we put a stakeholder list together of folks that we had reached out to at the time that were willing to participate. We have that. If you all don't have it, I can email it to you with the other stuff. I think
Shoot
we
that
had
out. I can't
40
remember. when I
40
put
or
that.
so names. And these were folks that we submitted with the grant that we said we're going to buy in. It was a multitude of businesses, a dozen or so residents, and then about 24 organizations. We'll ping that out, the stakeholder list with the other stuff.
Good.
Brian, do you guys know,
Well, you finished.
it's okay. Do you know if, or Jesse, do you know if there are any like organized business groups up like the 52nd, like on 52nd Street? Like, I know they're all clustered in those two like areas, but is there any like, do they talk to each other? Like, are they organized and all?
I'm not aware.
I don't know of any, not really co-ops, but there's a couple of similar setups up there, but I don't know any, I don't have any contacts.
I can reach out to Hope, though. They might be knowledgeable.
I think Half Liter and Big Lug would be really down too.
what extent do you want involved? I'm not sure it's appropriate for the steering committee, but some of the larger investors, organizations, whether they're residential real estate investors or commercial developers that are active in the neighborhood or making investments in the neighborhood, do you want somebody like that, at least somebody representing that industry on the steering committee? Or would you prefer to have them just be a constituent in the planning process?
I would prefer them to be a constituent, but that's just me.
You guys, Jesse, Brian, have any thoughts about it?
I mean, there's a usefulness in as much that like the dude who owns like 2 or 3 plots on 46th Street, I'd prefer to like be collaborative, but I don't know. I'll default to other people's perspectives of, whether or not you want to just keep folks like that at arm's length in a process like this.
Well, in this stakeholder list, there might be enough names for you all to say, we think these 12 or 15 people are the right steering committee folks. And we can help you go inquire whether they're interested in serving in that capacity. Some of those folks are on that list, like Holiday and I think Onyx and East. And but the Black Firefighter Association brought up Haverford, Friends of Arsenal Park, School 55. I don't know if 91 signed on to that at the time, but yeah, I'll send this over with that and you guys can kind of think about that. Cool. Well, I don't insist that we run till 7 o'clock. So if everybody's good and wants to move on with your evening, we're happy to wrap this up.
Yeah.
We owe you some information. We'll get that out to you in the morning and look forward to continuing the conversation in 2 weeks.
Thank you guys for your time.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate all your time, guys.
Have a
Bye-bye.
What you saying?
Brandon said Midwest cash offer.